Hey guys, and I am just coming on to say that I don't think that we'll ever have community, right? And the reason why I'm thinking about community is because I recently came across a nonprofit and their overarching theme, which I think for most nonprofits, really the goal, or at least one of the goals of the nonprofit, is always to foster a sense of community. And I was debating on whether partnering or joining this nonprofit, and I realized that so much of the nonprofit work, right, and their works and their attempts rather at community, they underdeliver. And I think in part one of that is definitely due to a lack of funding, right? Due to a lack of funding, due to a lot of persons, which I don't want to say that they're undereducated, but it may be inexperienced, and so what made me think about this was just how so many people come online and try to do the work of building or bridging the gaps within the Black community, right? Rebuilding what Reagan did, rebuilding what happened, right, in 1865, like just trying to really repair. And I think the reason why these efforts fall short continuously, because you have the work of the scholars, right? You have the academics, the teachers in our communities who can say, hey, this is what took place at this time and point of history. And we can acknowledge that these events were very grotesque and very altering in regards to the psyche, in regards to the economic progression, in regards to African Americans, and even relationally. But we can't ever really seem to tie the connect the dots rather to where we are today, and so I always find these conversations very interesting when you have, by and large, right, I would say vast majority of African Americans who are kind of at this place now because I think there is such a huge gap in the education, right? We know we've gotten rid of African American history. We know they banned CRT. Like there is no teaching, right? You have to absolutely undergo independent study. And because we know most people are not going to sit down and read books about nonfiction and African American history and go through 345 pages or whatever, right? You're just going to be met with information from the internet. And if you get on Facebook, even if you just create an account and you're an African American, Facebook has a very, like Meta rather, right, has a very interesting way of pushing a lot of just really, really horrible things, right? Like I would say a lot older than Gen Z, right? I'm approaching my 30s. And so it's like, I don't listen to Sexy Red. You know what I mean? But for some odd reason, I create a Facebook account and there, if I just scroll a little bit, there's Sexy Red. You really get all of these very degrading images of Black women. And so when you don't have any education, right, you have no idea what took place, right, with the March on Washington. And I'm just throwing events out there that, where African American people came together and, we did have community. We were unified. We did have values. We are capable of being civil and, join together for a greater good, for the greater good of our community, right? When you don't have any awareness of these events, right? And that's what you're seeing with this younger generation. And some other people, right? Other people of different ages who just didn't have that knowledge either, right? I would actually argue that African American history is actually one of those things that you're really not many people are privy to. It's a bit of a privilege to learn about African American history because oftentimes you do have to undergo some type of advanced degrees to really be well versed in what took place in this country, right? And why Black people are where they are. And typically people who do have that education, they do have that awareness, they are far away, right? They are not, anywhere in our proxy. They're not in our networks. And so, you may see them on YouTube, but even still today, I think a lot of the history is being a bit watered down as people are creating YouTube channels and able to generate income from YouTube and search platforms. And reason being, well, it's about, of course, we start talking about African American history and you're teaching it as an African American. Sometimes it's about palatability. And then I think the other aspect of that, I would say younger people my age, at least with the algorithm, feeds me sometimes. You have a bunch of young persons and it's kind of still about being liked, right? You're young, you want to be, you're kind of impressionable. I think many of us who are in this state, I think that we would probably identify with some more like liberal type thing. And so I think when you start to kind of have these categorizations, and we're in a space now where I think I would say the divide politically, right, is a little bit more it's just more prevalent, right? It's always been there, but I think now you have the internet, so things just feel more amplified. So people are kind of worried about being liked, and people aren't going to say things that would offend a large part of their audience, right? And then sometimes people really just don't feel that way. I think there comes a point in time where, you can absolutely reach a certain level in your life, whether it's socially or economically, where you no longer feel the effects of racism on the front end, right? I think you can reach a point where if you're not really embedded in the knowledge and you don't really have the educational piece, I think it kind of becomes background noise, because I do think that there has been shifts that have been made. And I think a large part of those shifts. And so the information is watered down, right? And I told you guys I was reading Clint Smith's How the Word is Passed. And it is, it depends on who tells the story, right? And so that's kind of where we are when you start talking about education and the point of history. But in terms of my overall purpose of this podcast episode was just to kind of, really shine a light on the realities. If we don't start to acknowledge how, the things that have happened, right, from a historical context, the things that have happened, how it plays out in our actions today, right? Every culture is going to have its degenerates, right? And surely we can just say, hey, look, they are the degenerates, right? We're going to have some of those outliers within every culture. And we just, choose to ignore and just, we want to turn a blind eye. That's fine. But I think it's another thing to be filled with so much self-hatred and simultaneously have this awareness of what has taken place within the African American community, since being in an American, being within American society, and to not be able to connect the dots, right? To shame men and women for the choices, I don't know when we are going to start bridging that gap in the name of community. Right? Because what's happening is that we're really creating a bit of an off branch for communities, for people who think like us and who look like us. And that's fair, right? That's valid. Like, you want to be around like-minded individuals. But what happens when these communities start to become polarized, right? What happens when it kind of starts to become this sense of us versus them, right? What happens when you have all of this like gray, black and white type of thinking? I think about so much of what people say and do on the internet. And it's very interesting because I think even those who critique those who are quote unquote bird brains or whatever, whatever name they want to call them, right? Everyone is like, so critical. They think that they're engaging in critical thinking because they're criticizing someone or something or some type of behavior, right? They think that they're engaging in critical thinking. It's very funny. But, I just wonder, like, as we sit in this space, I just wonder what does that really get us? What does that really get us? I just don't think that that's healing for anybody. I know we like to think shame is a motivator, but I would actually argue that it's the opposite. I don't know what it is about African Americans. I think one, just not really being privy to other cultures, and more specifically white culture, right? Most Black people don't have a lot of white friends, right? They're not privy to white communities and what really goes on in these gorgeous subdivisions that we love to drive past and drive through with our families and dream of a better future one day. We have no idea what's taking place, right? And that's the white bonus, right? And that's why the work is so important, because when you start to understand what is taking place, you start to understand white supremacy and understand that you will never be in some of these spaces, not because you're incapable, but because there is a system and an institution that is designed to keep you out, right? You will stop all this self-hating rhetoric in the name of critical thinking or critical theory or whatever it is against Black people. What you have today is the modern weaponization of intellectualism, right? Everybody wants to appear to know something that other people don't. And oftentimes African Americans are at the brunt of it. Okay. When you grow up and you go to a public school, it's not your fault. It's not your fault. You know what I mean? It's not your fault that like private education is not accessible to everybody. It's not your fault your mother maybe didn't know about a lottery to get you in with some type of scholarships. It's not your fault you didn't even know how to learn. Do you not understand? Like, I don't think people even understand most public schools. It's not this noble thing where it's like, we're public school teachers, we're going to work hard, right? It's not Abbott Elementary, y'all. And so it's not Abbott Elementary. It's not this thing where you have people who care about you, right? It's not this thing where teachers are like, man, it's not Akilah in the B, y'all. It's not this thing where teachers are like, man, your kid is a good kid and here's the programs that he can get in. No, that's not at all what it is. And so when you get online, you have a lot of people who are making content, who are shaping their entire worldview based off of the things that they see online. And it's false. It's not real. It's not real by any stretch of the imagination. And it's quite frankly, it's tragic. It's tragic. It's tragic. You have a bunch of people who, hate African Americans because of what they see online, failing to realize that real life is nothing like sensation, right? It's not exceptional, right? It is the day in, day out of bad things that happen to people. And I think most people who kind of get on this high horse, especially in regards to Black people, Black behavior in our culture, and they're African Americans, right, within the community, these are people who have quite honestly been shielded from some of the harsh realities of life, right? They've been shielded from some of the disappointments of life. I don't think people realize that, if bad things haven't happened to you, just count your blessings, right? Sometimes things can happen to us because of our choices. Absolutely. That's inevitable. I'm not arguing against that, right? We can make some choices and hey, it can alter some things. But one of the things that's very interesting about African Americans and what we have in our culture is we always have this overseer type of relationship with one another, right? We don't meet one another with this level of compassion. We don't say to the young woman or the young man, hey, listen, you can still make something of yourself from this. And maybe we do in the, in general sense, but like, just the language that we use when we engage with one another, how we act towards one another, and I'm not here to be the person who is like wagging the finger, you know what I mean? Like, I think everybody hasn't, but I just think overall, that's really the crux of it. You know what I mean? So I don't know. I think that, like I said, if bad things haven't happened to you, if you have not found yourself in some very unfortunate situations, you should just be very thankful. Because I think as we get older in life, the reality is that, life happens to everyone and maybe it just hasn't happened to you yet. Right. I think most people who get on these platforms and they have these type of attitudes, life just hasn't happened for them yet. You know what I mean? Like, I just think there's really something in going through and living life and dealing with things that happen to you sometimes that are a little bit out of your control because that's just life, but I think people who have had a very controlled life, very linear life, right? They've gone to school, they married their high school sweetheart. Like, these are the people who get on the platforms and who have so much to say, you know what I mean? About what the Black people ain't doing and and it's like, that's kind of what you see. And so empathy is something that actually cannot be cultivated with practice. It's not something that can be read about. It actually is something you have to live. It's something it's something that is formed, I personally believe, through hardship. And I'm not saying that we should glorify suffering. Okay. I'm not here to be I'm not pushing martyrdom in any way. But I do think that we have to acknowledge that, empathy truly is one of the things that, you just ain't getting that. You just don't get to be a compassionate and kind person because you think you are. Oftentimes it's something that has been birthed through you. And so really what we're kind of looking at today is the lack of character development, right? When people stop living and they get online, it's like reading magazines all day, right? And you even talk about people who have like porn addiction, right? When you step into a fantasy world, you stop engaging with the real world and the people around you. So when you see people who are struggling or, may have a wrong type of ideology or maybe took the wrong path or whatever the case may be, you don't feel compassion for them. You don't see them as a person, right? You just don't, and I don't know if that's commodification. I don't know what that is. But what I will say is that we've stopped engaging with the world and we don't engage with one another in a compassionate and human way anymore. There's no room to be human. That's why you have a lot of kids today who don't get out in the world and try. They don't want their first apartment to be anything other than a high rise, even though they have no idea how they're going to make, $1,400 a month in rent. You know what I mean? They don't want the $800 apartment with the pink tiles in the bathroom. You know what I mean? Everybody wants such a high life. And I joke about it all the time, but I say everybody I meet is on a road to 1 million. You know what I mean? Everybody you meet is on a road to 1 million. And that's just what it is today. So there you have it. When people stop living, character stops being developed. It starts getting harder and harder to meet genuine and authentic people who have compassion for other people, who can sit with the realities of life and who can understand the humanities in other people, right? And so what happens is you're getting all of these people who lack that type of character development in positions of influence, in positions of power, in positions of director roles. And so, by and large, persons of influence, right? And so, the catalyst of that is that the world becomes more and more crueler, right? Look at Donald Trump. It's so much more than, just, the presidency, et cetera, et cetera. No, this is like, you talk about leadership. When our leaders are, racist and cruel and all that, has a direct impact on people who follow them and those who, sit under their influence. And it's no different than small time creators, So that's where we are today. I just wanted to come on and say that because I think it's so important for everybody to at least have this level of awareness. And so that's really the catalyst for many things today. But overall, if you're not going to connect the dots, rather, or if you cannot connect the dots of modern day behavior to what has taken place systemically, institutionally within the African American community, you are not community building, and you don't need to brand yourself as that, right? You do not deserve to sit in the room with the microphone and talk about Black issues and so forth, right? You just don't. And so there you have it, folks. And I hope you guys have a great day. I know this podcast episode was all over the place. Peace.